World Monitor Sunday, a television presentation of the Christian Science Monitor. And now, John Hart from Boston.
Three things today. General Schwarzkopf said we are well on the way to peace after the Iraqis agreed to all coalition terms in a meeting in the desert. The Iraqi ambassador to the UN said the war is over after the UN Security Council passed resolution number 13 last night, putting the UN stamp on the coalition's peace terms, leaving sanctions and the use of force resolution in place to enforce them. And the Iranian news agency reports today demonstrations against President Saddam Hussein in two southern Iraqi towns. Things have changed for Saddam Hussein. More important, they've changed for every country in the Middle East. What kind of peace there is and Middle East there'll be depends on seeing what has changed and what hasn't. Helping us look today is Phoebe Marr, historian and specialist on political instability in the Persian Gulf, currently at the National Defense University. Farouk El-Baz, former science advisor to the President of Egypt, presently at Boston University, an American with intimate knowledge of the Middle East. And our usual wise men, Dick Catani, editor of the Christian Science Monitor, and Earl Fell, editor of World Monitor magazine. To begin with, Dr. Marr, your list of changes and things that didn't change.
Well, there are many things that, that have changed, but let me cite three or four. First of all, it's clear that the war has ended with U.S. and coalition victory, and this is going to give the United States, I think, a window of opportunity, perhaps brief, to exercise some influence in helping to reshape the area and solve some problems. Second, of course, there have been losers as well as winners and changes in power relationships, and I think clearly Iraq is the loser, has lost a great deal of power in the area, and so too, I believe, have the Palestinians and the PLO. And I think in terms of future changes, where we may see changes in leadership, are in those two areas, in Iraq and possibly in the Palestinians as well. And perhaps last but not least, we have a new coalition in the area which has, for the moment at least, created divisions in the Arab world. Remains to be seen the extent to which that coalition will continue its cohesion and or whether these divisions will be healed. And I might add here, it seems to me too, a more intangible issue is government accountability. I think certainly in the Iraqi case, this is going to be of prime concern, perhaps a lesson to be learned, that government accountability, more open societies and democracy will be something that the Middle East can move toward. And I think the same thing could probably be said for Kuwait, which perhaps has a better chance of moving in that direction. So what kind of societies and governments, at least in some countries, are going to be created is another interesting change we'll have to watch.
Thank you. Dr. El-Baz, what changes do you think Arabs see in the Middle East?
Well, to me, there are two significant changes. The first one is that America came to save an Arab country. There has been a perception in the Middle East for a long time that the United States of America is willing to put its military might only to save Israel. Now America came in to save an Arab country. So the whole perception of the West and colonialism and new colonialism will change and has already changed in the mind of most Arabs. The other item that has changed significantly is the fact that within the Arab world now and to the populations in most Arab countries, rhetoric is not going to be as significant as it used to be in the past. People used to follow a leader that just spoke rhetorically about their future and their past and this and that, and now we see that they have not followed this path at all. So they are more intelligent, they are more knowledgeable, they are more concerned about the future in real terms.
Heroism is a fragile position. How can the United States remain a hero, and what would cost it that heroism in the coming days?
Well, I think the beginning of the heroism is already here because of the fact that every war in the Middle East has opened an incredibly good opportunity for lasting peace. In the aftermath of many wars, no such peace really came through. But this one was the biggest war, and it opens the biggest gate for a potential for peace.
We've had your expression of the biggest gate, and Dr. Marr has spoken about the window of opportunity, which may be only briefly open. We have Secretary of State Jim Baker on his way in a few days to make a tour of the region, and it's been quite clear during the past couple of months that he is determined to make some breakthroughs during this period. Determination and success are obviously two different things. We've had the period in the 1970s, which eventually led up to some real action on the Mideast in the Camp David agreements. We had in 1982 a Reagan administration declaration of a new policy, which the president almost immediately deserted after declaring it. And now we have a new Secretary of State, relatively new, trying to do better than he did in the last couple of years, during which he and Mr. Shamir of Israel have really fenced over making any progress. Do either of you think that Mr. Baker is going to come back with some solid proposals to be put forth in terms of Arab-Israeli peace meetings and Arab-Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations?
In my case, I really believe so, because of the fact that discussions have already begun about the potential for Arab-Israeli discussions in the aftermath of the war, because I don't really think the American administration right now would like to go back to the Middle East anytime soon. I think the stage has been set for a very decent peace plan, because of the fact that from the point of view of the Arabs, the Israelis have taken a very reasonable position throughout this war. They have kept away from entering the conflict because everybody wanted them not to do it because of the importance to the coalition in general. And also, I think the Israelis have figured that missiles could come from the sky, even though you have a lot of territory. So in the Israeli mind, the territory in itself is not really going to safeguard their peace forever. So maybe a peace plan with the Arabs would be the way to go about it, and I think that might help.
I think before the United States gets too far along on these initiatives, it has to do a little tuning up of its own, I think, point of view in regard to the region and our recent role. For example, I think it's not that the loss of lives on one side and the other were so disproportionate, but the loss of lives to the Iraqis in Kuwait and in their own southern tier, as well as the loss of life among the Kuwaitis, I think that has to be mourned and regretted by our side. I think, you know, if we're talking about a new world order in which all peoples are regarded equally, they have to be regarded equally if they're among the fallen or if they're among the survivors. And I think there's a universalism of grief and tragedy in this which can't be overlooked. Another point to me is I think we have to get off this kicking the Vietnam syndrome idea. The Vietnam War had nothing to do with the Iraq War. The mistakes that the United States made in either getting into that war or in prosecuting that war have nothing to do with the current victory. The dissembling that the military and civilian leaders made during that period wasn't really overcome under the present circumstances. The suffering that many American soldiers endured, as well as the other side, that isn't erased by the immediate victory. The thousands of Amerasian children who aren't wanted in their own territory and are unclaimed by their American fathers in America, that hasn't gone away. Even the idea that the United States showed that it was willing to use force isn't new in this instance, that there isn't a change there. We attacked Gaddafi in Libya. That should have been a lesson to Noriega in Panama. We just took care of Noriega in Panama. That hadn't been a lesson to Saddam in Iraq. So I think the idea that we learn from these little episodes of history, or big episodes in history, is something else that should be observed.
Well, Vietnam was about fallibility, among many other things, and it doesn't hurt to keep a memento of fallibility in the trophy case. It seems to me that if the nightmare of Vietnam is over, what we don't want to replace it with is a fantasy of infallibility.
I'd like to pick up on what Dr. El-Baz had to say and actually ask Phoebe Marr if she feels we're likely to have the so-called double-track negotiations in which you have those Arab countries which were part of the coalition fighting in the Gulf, the first to go forth into negotiation with Israel, or whether we would have those negotiations, if they take place, taking place simultaneously with some kind of new Israeli-Palestinian talks.
Well, I really don't know the answer because I haven't seen Secretary of State Baker's agenda, but let me make a few comments about that. First of all, we're likely to get more success on the first track for the very reasons that Dr. El-Baz mentioned. Obviously, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Egyptians already have a peace treaty with Israel. Even the Syrians would be more disposed toward negotiations, although in the case of Syria, I think we have to be a little careful. Syria might be disposed to negotiate because it has something to gain on Golan, but my sense of it is that they're not going to go far enough to gain something on Golan by deserting the Palestinians. Where I see the difficulty arising is in the second track, that is to say, settling the West Bank and Gaza, negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. And I'd like to introduce a cautionary note here. We shouldn't get carried away by optimism because this is going to be very difficult, and perhaps this is one of the things that may not change. I think the two main difficulties here. One is the state of Palestinian leadership. Is Arafat going to remain? Is he going to be acceptable? If he does remain, it seems not very likely that the Israelis would negotiate with him. And if he doesn't, what sort of leadership is going to emerge? I see the Palestinians as very bitter, frustrated, and in disarray. There isn't a visible partner out there yet for negotiations. The second question that has to be raised, of course, is how amenable Shamir and the Likud are going to be for negotiations. They have been left, it seems to me, in a very good position in the aftermath of this. They, of course, are interested in integrating Soviet Jews into Israel, and this might provide a positive element that we can use to work with them on inducing some, perhaps, concessions with the Palestinians. But that's going to be extremely difficult, and I don't think we should be overly optimistic about it.
They may be in a good position, but if you look at not too long a period of time, the period from 1967, the great Israeli triumph in the 1967 war, to the present, and then take an equal amount of time into the future, according to everything I understand, we will face a world in which Middle Eastern oil will be really the dominant energy source of the world, that most other sources of oil will be not dried up, but will be serving only their local populations. Now, Dr. El-Baz may have more to say about that, but my understanding is that leverage increases every year to the point where somewhere 10 or 15 years into the next century, Middle Eastern oil will be the vital supply, unless, of course, there's some a major breakthrough on other energy supplies in the meantime.
Well, yes, but may I say that I agree with that analysis, but it takes leadership and vision and organization to use leverage in a way that gets you benefits.
Well, I would agree with that, and I also would like to say that one of the things that did not change, going back to your question, John, is a very good energy policy for America and the West to at least lessen the dependence on imported oil. I think that is something that should be changed, and it has not. We do not really see enough now of a blueprint for an energy policy to lessen America's dependence on imported oil and the Western dependence on imported oil by looking at other sources of energy. That is something that should be looked into.
That's one of the ironies of the President's perhaps well-deserved 80, 85, 90% approval rating is that it may cow those opposition forces in the Congress that were ready to do some battle over energy policy and to push for more conservation than the administration is at the moment envisioning.
I'd like to raise the question of forgiveness. It's been raised by King Hussein the day after the war practically ended, and Kuwait said no, no forgiveness. Saudi Arabia said no, no forgiveness to Jordan. Not in the words, but in the demeanor of the president, not one dime. After a war in which we waged only against Saddam Hussein and not against, specifically, repeatedly, time after time, not against the people. I guess I address it to you, Dr. El-Baz, the question of forgiveness within the Arab world, and to the rest of us, the forgiveness in the spirit of the United States.
Well, I believe that most of the statements right now are being said in the heat of the battle, because we're still so close to what has happened. And I personally believe that these kinds of issues subside in the Arab world very fast, as people believe that the situation has been diffused, and they get to meet and they discuss things that can be diffused in a short while. So I don't really believe that these animosities that we see today that have been created will last for a very long period of time. They may be against a specific person. For instance, the position of the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and others vis-a-vis Yasser Arafat is incredibly tough right now for good reason. And the change of a leadership in the PLO will change this wholeheartedly. So it is not going to be long-lasting such that it will ruin relations in the Arab world.
Dr. Marr?
Well, let me be a little bit iconoclastic here. Naturally, I think forgiveness on all sides, is a virtue, and I agree that a healing process will, and of course, should take place. But I think we all, not only the United States but the Arabs, are going to have to step back and do some deep thinking about the lessons of this, particularly in the case of Iraq, which in my view brought most of this problem on itself. And I think we're going to see a discrediting of the kind of regime that Iraq was, not only dictatorship, but the old command economy, socialism, and so on. And maybe we're going to be seeing the beginning of the sort of thing we saw in Eastern Europe. And in fact, perhaps one of the best things that could happen would be the development of more attractive models of government and development to which the losers could adhere in the future, rather than just going back to the same old pattern that prevailed before and which caused a lot of this difficulty.
And that model should be in Kuwait, do you think?
I think Kuwait would be an excellent place to establish it, particularly in terms of a more accountable government, a responsible government which doesn't take vengeance, for example, on Palestinians and others. And just as Western Europe provided an attractive model for Eastern Europe, perhaps we could begin with Kuwait, which would then be attractive enough to spread some seeds in the surrounding area.
Will
and
Saudi Arabia accept that sort of government next door? A democracy right next door?
Well, perhaps in time. I understand that the leadership might not like it initially, but inevitably it will sow some seeds. I'm not suggesting radical change. And in Iraq has yet to, we don't know what's going to happen there, but it's possible that there will be a change of regime, and who knows, perhaps something more attractive could be created there as well.
I would like to interject here about the discussion of the democracy or the form of government or whatever, because there is a form of democracy in these Arab governments that doesn't really exist anywhere else. Maybe when we say democracy in our own style, or the way we see it here in the West. Because in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all of the countries of the Arabian Gulf region, there are 6 of them in the Gulf Cooperation Council, there are democracies such that an individual can actually reach the emir or the ruler and so on one given day of the week to take his own gripes to the head of the state or to the minister or to anybody in the royal family. So there is a sort of democracy because these governments rule only by consensus. if they lose their touch of feeling the pulse of the nation, they will no longer be able to rule.
That's accessibility, but is it accountability?
Accountability is what needs to be done, and that is the one that will the parliaments and the consultative councils and so on this is really the only thing that is needed to be added.
Isn't it also easier for those governments, though, with wealth flowing in vast quantities, to perform in a way that is more difficult for some other states which don't have democracies?
Not the money. The money did not figure prominently because of the fact that this was the type of rule 250 years ago when these people were the have-nots. Yeah.
Well, this seems almost quaint, though, in a world in which electronics and technology make the rest of the world immediate. The desire for automobiles and getting about, the social pressures for equality. I think that this is really also what happened in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. Their part of the world was just falling behind where the rest of the world was going. And how this will be brought there in any even sense among those countries is really very hard to see yet.
But it can't be kept out.
I would like to say that there's another element shaping up here. The U.S. role in this, it seems to me, has tied the governments of the coalition much more closely to the West, to the international community. There is a possibility that these countries can partake in a fuller sense of world developments. If other countries in the area continue to turn inward and attempt to repel that sort of thing, I think some of them may fall behind. I think this is another important issue. Are countries going to, behind the rhetoric of anti-imperialism, going to turn inward and against this sort of progress, or are they going to join it? This, of course, remains to be seen.
I have a specific question. What does Iraq have to fear from Syria, from Turkey, from Iran?
Well, there is one view that thinks it needs to fear overt military aggression. I tend to discount that, with one possible exception. Should the central authority in Baghdad decline so badly that we have a resurgence of a Kurdish rebellion, then I think the Turks might worry about that and possibly do something limited militarily. I don't expect that, however. I think what they may have to fear is external interference in their domestic affairs. Both Iran and Syria, perhaps even Saudi Arabia, have alternative government candidates available that they might like to see in power in Baghdad. But I would tend to discount all of these scenarios. I think what Iraq must do is to get its own domestic house in order. It's going to be overwhelmingly preoccupied with that, both politically and economically. And if, I say if, there is going to be a change in government in Baghdad, I think it's got to come from inside.
Since we've been talking about human rights and about democracy in these countries, I feel we ought to pay some attention to one of the great ironies of Mr. Bush's New World Order, and that is that in order to make it work, he plans to use, to a considerable extent, the UN Security Council, and will need votes free of vetoes. And part of the cost of that, in the case of the Soviet Union and China, is going to be the kind of thing that's already been done by this administration with China, and that is support of governments which are perhaps going to be more repressive of human rights within those two great powers. I don't want to lead us out of the Middle East too far, but I think that's one of the things we're going to have to watch for. If we want to use the UN to create, say, peacekeeping forces to monitor the peace along the Kuwaiti border, if we want to use the UN to back the idea that we not have technology transfers to other parts of the third world that might involve nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons, we may have to watch that we don't get into the point of trading off other people's human rights in the Soviet Union and China.
Does the UN, for cohesion, need an exorbitantly bad guy to rally against?
That's often the case.
Maybe it also needed the bad guy to begin rallying around. I really think that This particular case here is a case whereby the situation was so bad that the United Nations may in the future step in and really play a very good role by the initiation of hostilities and by the United Nations taking that very good role during the crisis.
How soon is the United States prepared to do this exact same thing again?
I would doubt that it's going to be very soon. At this moment, if you took a poll this week, you might find people willing to do the great victory at low cost. But in fact, I think as time goes on, there are going to be other costs, the difficulties of negotiation, totaling up the bill for military, et cetera.
This will have to be the beginning of the summaries, Richard.
All right.
Yeah.
This is the last round. Right. Okay. Your summary.
Well, I was just going to say I find it curious that the one major achievement we've had in the Middle East was with Jimmy Carter in a very peaceful venture, not a warlike venture. And I wish we were on that footing today rather than in the aftermath of this battle.
Well, I think the United States of America has played a very responsible role and showed also a great deal of diplomatic acumen in keeping the coalition moving and keeping the United Nations intact in the against aggression. And in the coming phase, we will see that this kind of leadership will help tremendously in shaping up the peace.
Well, I think that the United States, because of its credibility now, has a window of opportunity to encourage the settlement of some problems and a new environment. It must certainly make a real effort to work on the Arab-Israeli and the Palestinian problem, and to encourage. It can't directly reshape, but to encourage what I'd like to call an attractive model of development and a movement toward more accountability, for example, in Kuwait.
A quick question. How does the United States do that without appearing in the Arab world to have imposed the Pax Americana?
It has to be very indirect. It has to be very subtle. I would say it has to be behind the scenes. And I think it would be helpful for the United States to continue to make statements from time to time with respect to the fact that our ideals include human rights, civil rights, and more accountability and open government. So people at least know where we stand.
Thank you.
The administration in Washington needs to concentrate as distinctly and as vigorously on this period of this window that you mentioned as it did on the war it just fought. It has leverage for a brief period with both many of the Arab governments and the Israeli government. It ought to use it.
Well, it seems to me that one of the most touching things is the American soldiers taking care of the Iraqi soldiers that have been captured and treating them with respect and care. Dr. Maher, you spoke of Iraq having brought this upon itself. Certainly it had. But these are a people who have lived with a gun at their heads. Those young men went to war in the same way and were left out in the desert, someone else's desert in the same way. And as we welcome our heroes home, I think it's well to remember that it might be unseemly for us to be spiking the ball in the end zone for a long time after it was over. Thank you, Dr. Maher. Thank you, Dr. El-Baz, Dick, Earl, and thank you. Goodbye.